Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Today I'm going to walk you through this hands-on lab named Continuously Detecting Vulnerabilities with Amazon Inspector, available on QA platform previously known as Cloud Academy. I'll first read through the description of this lab, then start the lab. Amazon Inspector is an offering from AWS that continuously scans your applications and infrastructure for common exploits and vulnerabilities. It supports multiple AWS accounts, allowing you to centralize your vulnerability management for AWS workloads. Learning to use Amazon Inspector will help anybody looking to improve the security of workloads running in AWS. In this hands-on lab, you will activate Amazon Inspector, tour its features, and observe some of its findings. Learning objectives. Upon completion of this beginner-level lab, you will be able to activate Amazon Inspector, review a finding, remediate a finding. Intended audience: candidates for AWS Certified DevOps Engineer Specialty Certification, Cloud Architects, DevOps Engineers, and Software Engineers. Prerequisites. Familiarity with the following will be beneficial but is not required: Amazon Inspector, AWS Lambda. The following content can be used to fulfill the prerequisites: Amazon Inspector, understanding AWS Lambda to run and scale your code. Let's check those out quickly, or as fast as possible. Okay, and let's check out the environment before and environment after. Though these two pictures are the same, we can assume the starting environment is without Amazon Inspector and ends with Amazon Inspector joined in this system. So let's start the lab now. This first step, as usual, explains that we'll be using a sandboxed account with credentials and other details as shown in the left side panel. So I'll scroll through this part and start reading from the step to activating and touring Amazon Inspector. So while our cloud environment and bridge are spinning up, we can log in to our Sandbox AWS account, but we expect the whole cloud lab environment is not still 100% up and running. We'll read through this lab step, then do the hands-on part. Amazon Inspector is a service that you can use to continuously scan your workloads for exploits and vulnerabilities. It supports scanning the following: Amazon EC2 instances, container images in an Amazon Elastic Container Registry (ECR), AWS Lambda function, dependencies, and code. Amazon Inspector can be used by AWS organizations to scan multiple AWS accounts and centralize the management of vulnerability scanning and monitoring. Be aware that activating Amazon Inspector has a cost associated. For the latest pricing, visit the Amazon Inspector pricing page on the AWS website. AWS has two versions of Amazon Inspector. The previous version is now named Inspector Classic, and it only scans Amazon EC2 instances. You may see references to Inspector Classic in the AWS Management Console and in reference material. This lab targets the current version of Amazon Inspector, sometimes referred to as Inspector 2. Amazon Inspector can be used in conjunction with Amazon Event Bridge and Amazon Simple Notification Service (SNS) to automate notifying people or teams when a new finding is discovered. In this lab, you will activate Amazon Inspector in an AWS account, learn about its features, and review some of Amazon Inspector's findings. So, bridge environment is ready. Let's scroll through this pricing page. So this is the state as of today, end of February 2025. Let's finish reading this lab step. In the search bar at the top of the AWS Management Console, enter Inspector, and under Services, click the Amazon Inspector result. You will see a page that details what Amazon Inspector is and how it works. Note, you may see some blue notifications at the top of the page. These announce new features of Amazon Inspector and can be safely ignored in this lab. You can dismiss the notifications by clicking the X on the right-hand side. To begin activating Amazon Inspector, click the hamburger 3-bar icon in the top left and click Activate Inspector. A page titled Activate Inspector will load. To activate Amazon Inspector, on the right, click Activate Inspector. Momentarily, you will see the Amazon Inspector dashboard load. Activating Amazon Inspector typically takes less than 30 seconds. Note, you may see a dialog box titled Feedback for Amazon Inspector appear. Click the X in the top right corner to close the dialog box. Amazon Inspector initiates a scan upon being enabled. This can typically take up to 5 minutes to return results. In this lab, an AWS Lambda function and an Amazon EC2 instance have been created for you. These resources will generate findings in Amazon Inspector for you to observe. While waiting for the findings, you will tour some of the features of Amazon Inspector. In the left-hand menu, click Export SBOMs. A software bill of materials SBOM is a list of the components that are present in an AWS Lambda function, container image, or Amazon EC2 instance. SBOMs are adapted from manufacturing industries that regularly use a bill of materials to inventory the items that are used to make and provide a product. An SBOM typically consists of an application and its dependencies. It can also include software such as web servers, which aren't technically a part of the application but are used to provide access to an application to end users. Using an SBOM enables organizations to audit the components in their software and be confident that their software is secure and compliant with relevant regulations. Amazon Inspector automatically generates SBOMs for you. This page of the Amazon Inspector console allows you to export an SBOM in a format of your choice to an Amazon S3 bucket you have access to. Optionally, you can provide your own AWS KMS key to encrypt the SBOM such that only your organization can access it. In the left-hand menu, click Suppression Rules. Suppression rules allow you to filter Amazon Inspector's findings. Suppression rules may be appropriate when you are working with legacy systems that have known vulnerabilities that are mitigated in other ways. This could include using a network firewall to restrict access and increase security, or using an AWS Web Application Firewall to secure web applications. Suppression rules can be used to filter out findings whilst a legacy application is being modernized. It may also be appropriate to use suppression rules if the findings are not relevant to your organization's compliance requirements. Attribute suppression rules can filter on include AWS Account Identifier, an Image Identifier, a Resources Tag, a VPC Identifier. Optional, feel free to click Create Rule and click into the Suppression Rule Filters box to see all the attributes you can filter on. Click Cancel to return to the Suppression Rules page. In the left-hand menu, click Vulnerability Database Search. This page allows you to search for and retrieve detailed information on specific vulnerabilities. To see an example vulnerability, in the search box, enter the identifier below and click Search. For example, CVE 2014-0160. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. It is a publicly maintained list of computer security flaws. Each flaw is given an identifier beginning with the CVE dash. This specific CVE relates to a flaw in the OpenSSL library discovered in 2014 that affected many systems. This page displays a description of the vulnerability, information about its severity, and external references. In the left-hand menu, click Account Management. This page allows you to view details of AWS accounts and resources that Amazon Inspector covers. Amazon Inspector can be used with AWS organizations to centralize vulnerability scanning management. In AWS organizations, you can specify a specific AWS account to be the delegated administrator account for Amazon Inspector. From this account, you can view aggregated findings from the entire organization. You can use this page to deactivate Amazon Inspector for specific types of resources by clicking Actions. For example, you may wish to scan container images stored in Amazon Elastic Container Registry ECR repositories, but do not scan Amazon EC2 instances or AWS Lambda functions. This would reduce the cost of Amazon Inspector. In the left-hand menu, click General Settings. On this page, you can view the permissions granted to the service-linked AWS IAM role used by Amazon Inspector. Optional, feel free to click View Role Permissions to see the permissions. This page also allows you to deactivate Amazon Inspector in this AWS account. To finish storing the Amazon Inspector service, in the left-hand menu, click Usage. This page will give you an estimate of the cost of Amazon Inspector. You can break the cost down by AWS account and by scan type. Summary: in this lab step, you activated Amazon Inspector and toured the main features of the service. So we have one validation check in this lab step. Let's test it out, though we expect it to fail. Okay, that's as expected, so let's scroll to the top and start going through this lab hands-on. So we have to activate Amazon Inspector in this region, US West 2. And browse around a bit, search for this CVE, for example. Essentially, tour the main features as set, so let's do that. So we are in the correct region, Oregon, US West 2. Okay. Do we have Inspector already bookmarked? No, let's do that. Let's close these notifications. Let's check out this screenshot in another window. A bit zoomed in to see how it works. And let's activate it. Get started, and let's activate Inspector. Let's close out this feedback window. And these notifications, welcome to Inspector. And your first scan is underway. Let's browse around a bit. Let's switch from dashboard to findings. Let's check out these suppression rules. Create rule. What kind of rule filters we have available? Some common fields. Severity, EC2, ECR, network reachability, package vulnerability, lambda, code vulnerability. Then let's check out on-demand scans. Scans scan instances to see if they meet the security configurations recommended by the Center for Internet Security. Let's check that out. Create a new scan. You can choose sys benchmark level and learn more about that in the documentation. And set up recurring scans. Let's cancel. Vulnerability database search. So let's search for a specific one from the lab instruction. And here are details. No findings associated with this CVE yet. Account management. And general settings. Permissions. Let's view role permissions. Then EC2 scanning settings. We can choose scan mode between hybrid and agent-based. See ECR scanning settings, and usage. Okay, let's stop at that and proceed to step 2. Rerun this validation check. And the last step for this lab, reviewing findings in Amazon Inspector. Introduction. In this lab step, you will review the findings that Amazon Inspector has collected. You will also remediate the findings relevant to the AWS Lambda function. Instructions. To navigate to the Findings page, in the left-hand menu, click Findings. You will see a list of issues that Amazon Inspector has identified across an Amazon EC2 instance and an AWS Lambda function. These resources were deployed for you during the setup of this lab. To see more information about the finding, select the finding that has a severity of high. In the right-hand side, you will see a panel that displays details about this finding. Notice that in the Finding Overview section, the type is Package Vulnerability. This finding identifies that an issue exists with the version of the Nginx web server that is installed on the Amazon EC2 instance. During lab setup, an older Nginx package was installed on the instance deliberately to demonstrate Amazon Inspector's scanning ability. This finding can be addressed by installing the latest version of the Nginx package on the instance. New vulnerabilities are constantly being developed, used, and identified. Amazon Inspector is kept up to date with new vulnerabilities by AWS. By default, Amazon Inspector will check all common locations in which packages and software may be installed. You can also tell Amazon Inspector to check other non-standard paths. This is useful if you are working with legacy systems that do not follow modern installation path conventions. Optional, to see how to add a non-standard path, in the left-hand menu under General Settings, click EC2 Scanning Settings. Click Findings when finished. We saw that in a previous step. To view information about a finding against an AWS Lambda function, select one of the findings where the title begins with in1 Python pydantic dash. The impacted resource for this finding is an AWS Lambda function named jobbed processor. The finding relates to a denial of service vulnerability using regular expressions. The function uses an AWS Lambda layer provided by AWS called AWS Lambda Power Tools Python v2 that contains tools focused on enabling serverless best practices. The function was deliberately created using an older version of the layer than is currently available to demonstrate an AWS Lambda function finding in Amazon Inspector. Optional. Feel free to click on the other finding where impacted resource is job processor to see details of the other finding. The two findings for the AWS Lambda function can be addressed by updating the AWS Lambda function to use the latest version of the layer. To view details of another finding in the list, select the finding where the title begins with port 22 is reachable from an internet gateway. This finding tells you that the Amazon EC2 is publicly accessible on network port 22, a port typically used for administrator access to servers running the Linux operating system. This finding can be addressed by restricting access to the port. If administrator access is required, this can be restricted to the CIDR range of an Amazon VPC or specific IP address. There is a similar finding about port 80 being publicly accessible for the Amazon EC2 instance. These are examples of Amazon Inspector identifying potentially unintended network exposures. Next, you will remediate the AWS Lambda functions findings. In the search bar at the top of the AWS Management Console, enter Lambda, and under Services, click Lambda. You will see one function listed named Job Processor. To navigate to the function's configuration page, in the Functions table, click Job Processor. To edit layer information, scroll to the bottom of the page and inside the Layers section, click Edit. To update the version, click inside the Layer Version box and select the latest version. To save your change at the bottom, click Save. Return to the Amazon Inspector Findings page. To update the findings, click the Refresh button. You will see the findings for the AWS Lambda function disappear. Note, it can take up to a couple of minutes for the AWS Lambda findings to be removed. Feel free to either wait or click Refresh or finish the lab now. Summary: by successfully completing this lab, you have activated Amazon Inspector, stored Amazon Inspector's features, reviewed findings for an AWS Lambda function and an Amazon EC2 instance, remediated the finding for the AWS Lambda function. Let's test out this validation check over here. Check if the version of the AWS Lambda functions layer has been updated. When that fails, as we expect it to fail, we'll proceed to the hands-on part. So first, let's filter out the high findings. We expect to see reported finding related Nginx web server. Then we'll proceed to the Lambda function related finding. Then finding related to SSH and HTTP and the remediation part. Okay. Okay, now we have findings page populated with more findings that we previously saw. So first, the Nginx one of severity high. So this would be it. We see impacted resource, type package vulnerability, when it was reported, and status. Okay, let's dig into it. So we have here finding ID in JSON format. Finding details and inspector score and vulnerability intelligence. And details across finding overview, affected package. We see the Nginx, vulnerable coming from the instances OS. And what is the installed version that's vulnerable? Remediation recommendation: upgrade your installed software packages to the proposed fixed in version and release. For example, with sudo dnf check update, vulnerability details, let's check out this vulnerability ID. That sends us to Alice AWS Amazon.com page. Let's check that out. So we here have Amazon Linux Security Center and the issue overview. Here also we can check out details for Amazon Linux 1, Amazon Linux 2, announcements, and FAQs. We see the resource affected and the resource ID. Let's go over there. While that loads, okay, and tags. We see here what would be the fixed version and what's the current version. So we should be able to see that here in the among instance details. So actions, let's see instance settings, edit user data, and here it is in the Bootstrap script. See it here, and so vulnerability comes in from here. Okay, that's that for Nginx. Then for Lambda function, Pydantic, that's this finding. Let's check that out. So finding details and inspector score on vulnerability intelligence. This would be the installed version and fixed version. Package manager, file path. Remediation recommendation is to upgrade your installed software packages to the proposed fixed-in version and release. So towards the end of the lab, we will update that Lambda function layer as mentioned. Resource affected, layers used, there it is. AWS Lambda Power Tools Python v2, Lambda layer. Okay, and then SSH. Port 22 is reachable from an internet gateway, TCP. So we have a finding overview of type network reachability. And Pydantic was type package vulnerability. This one is coming from an EC2 instance. Details. Tags. We can verify this finding by checking out the open network paths. And the remediation recommendation is to restrict access to your instance by modifying the security groups or ACLs in the network path. So let's see if we go to this resource ID. And here security. So we see here both in outbound rules, port 80 and 22. And now let's proceed to remediate the lambda function binding. So we have here lambda bookmarked. In the job processor, we're interested in layer 1 details. At the bottom, we're currently using layer version 30, and we should edit that and replace it with the latest layer version, which is 78 at the moment. And this should resolve our issue. And now in the inspector, if we refresh the page, at the moment nothing happens. If we reload the page, it's still there. Let's give it a minute. Do expect this finding to disappear after a minute or so. We see here we have 21 minutes left in this lab environment. And now the finding disappeared. Let's rerun the validation check. Great, so with that all validations passed. And that would be all for this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this one. Until next video, bye for now.